Hey, good afternoon. It is October 8th. It's about 4:07 Eastern Standard Time in the United States of America. My name is Bev. This is the Bev D Show, and this is a different time of day to be doing the show, so if you hear my dog bark, there's a lot of deliveries around and that sort of thing, so he likes to announce every single one of them. Including present company included. We do cause trouble with ordering things. So that was my little disclaimer and a little bit of a housekeeping item. Another housekeeping item that I want to talk about is that I mentioned changing the format of the show, doing some different things, and I wanted to do this show. I was going to do something like, Manic Music Mondays, something real kitschy and corny like that. But I'm pretty excited about this. All these things came to mind, and just wanted to take a few minutes and share them with you. I titled the show today 1963, 1964, because those were pretty significant years for me. I was 3 years old in 1963, and I can promise you that although people say, oh, you really don't have a memory, you don't really know, that kind of thing, I do. And while, it's because people played movies or things over and over and, maybe you saw pictures or whatever, there are certain things that happened to me and that triggered certain memories. So I don't know how early you guys remember stuff, but I can assure you that I remember these things. So it was November 1963. I'm the youngest of 7. There was a whole mess of us in the living room. Our Kennedy had just been shot. Now, there are a couple of significant things that draw this to my memory, and that is this. One, that my sisters, I believe, were in love with him, as were many Americans. Many women across the world probably had their crush on Kennedy. But it was significant in that there's an image in my head. We had these beautiful hardwood floors. We were all in the living room. The floor is shining from sunlight. And we're all glued to the television listening to the horrific news that he had passed away. Now, me being 3 and just kind of, I guess you could say I was more observing my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad more so than I was the actual television itself. Because what I saw and what I witnessed, is, females crying hard over someone that we didn't really know. And it showed me at a very young age that even if someone isn't your best friend or in your life, when someone dies that you cared about, whether they even really knew it or not, it's devastating. And so that's a significant memory for me. And I subtitled this, talking about music and how it saved my life, and I was only 3 or 4 years old. And however strange or odd that sounds, it really did. So, being the youngest of 7, I had these brothers and sisters that were, my mom and dad had 5 kids at first, and then 2 stragglers, my sister and I. So there was a gap in between the 5 and the last 2. So my brothers and sisters were older and in their teens. And so rock and roll and music was huge in my ears, in my brain, in my body, in my soul. And I watched them dance. I'd watch them listen to different songs, and they're just, everything was through radio. And it was a really, really big deal. And of course, they would buy their records and all that kind of good stuff. And so I was obsessed. And being the youngest everybody says, oh, you got all the attention, you were babied. No, I wasn't. Everybody was busy. Teenagers were going on dates and falling in love and that sort of thing. And my sister, who was closest in age to me, didn't, for whatever reason, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, we just didn't play that well together. I don't know what happened there, but I found myself alone a lot. And believe it or not. And so we lived in this house that was in the country. I really didn't have any neighbors that, I raised my girls. They could fall out the front door and find somebody to play with. But I didn't have that. So I started falling in love and becoming crazy about writing. I wrote my first story when I was 5 years old. And the other thing that I became obsessed about, and when I say writing at 5 and 6, I mean, look, I'll read that story to you guys one day, but it was a tale. It was a little beginning, middle, and an end. And it got published in the school newspaper. But I drew. I loved chalkboards, crayons, pencils, I don't care. I loved doing this. And so my other escape was, though, that I found very early on was music. And I wasn't, again, I got shuffled around on whose room I was staying in, usually the sister I just had mentioned. But somewhere along the way, somebody gave me a hand-me-down. Now, the transistor radio was invented or came about in the mid-50s. So here we are moving forward into the 60s. And one of my brothers or sisters gave me a transistor radio. It probably had one station that I could hear, and I think it was 19 WHLO, and there was a 60 in it. Excuse me, in this Ohio area. So this was something I became obsessed with. And truly, I didn't care if it was music that I was listening to or someone talking. I was so fascinated with radio. And I decided at a very young age that was something that I wanted to do. But even more so, when they would play these hit songs and they would do certain things to my brain and my heart and get me all excited, and I would be dancing, a little girl dancing and stuff like that, I began listening to words. And I, obviously being the writer, I found that there was another way to communicate your written word was through music. Now you have to realize how that comes about in a kid's head. See, everybody takes that for granted. They're listening to the radio, they're watching television, they're watching movies. But when you really start processing, okay, John Lennon, Paul McCartney wrote a song on a napkin or a poem or whatever lyric on a napkin, and one day it became a song. And so those kinds of things I started becoming obsessed with. So November, we've got, November 1963. Now let's fast forward to February 1964. And that is when my world changed. And again, if you think I don't remember this, I do. It was the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Beatles had come across the pond. They were already the rage, across the pond, and now they're coming to the United States, and they show up on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I was beside myself as a little girl looking at these, young girls screaming in the audience. They're up there laughing, looking at each other while they're singing. And so from that experience, I felt joy. So growing up in my house, there was a lot of, obviously raising all these kids, and it was one blue collar salary. And so there were tense times. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of, arguing amongst the siblings and all that kind of stuff. And remember, the house was gorgeous, but it had one bathroom. So 9 people, one bathroom, there's going to be fights, right? So this transistor radio and me escaping with it really did save my life. I would get out of the way, get out of everyone's hair, not drive people crazy. And I would pull myself aside and I would be listening to this radio. But what I saw on television was like a baseball bat in a very good way hitting me over the head. And so from then on, I mean, I just wanted to start going to, I think at my first concert, I was 13 years old. That doesn't mean I didn't want to go before then, but I found out about these. And so growing up in the 60s with that music and those early where I was 3, 4, and 5 years old with somebody's transistor radio, and they must have been affordable because I know that once or twice this was rewarded to me by a brother or sister. Maybe they got an actual record player or they just felt like this is something I needed. But the transistor radio became the number one electronic device in the early 60s. Can you imagine that? Isn't that awesome? And so it had that real tinny sound and you know, I actually listened to one. I found one at a thrift store years and years ago, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And listening to that radio, there's something very special about that quality. And I was actually listening to, I think it was a football game or something like that. But it was really awesome. So I would tuck myself away with those kind of things. And then I became obsessed with number one songs and that kind of thing. And so I thought I'd take a little bit of a time and find out what was the number one hit in that 1964 era. But lo and behold, it was the Fireballs with Jimmy Gilmer, and it's the Sugar Shack. And I just got the biggest kick out of this because I have listened to this song all my life, off and on, because I listen to oldie stations and things like that. But I listened to this song all my life, know all the words, every word. It is a coffee house. So the Sugar Shack was a coffee house. This guy sees a girl there, and he gets married to her. Then we've got He's So Fine, My Boyfriend's Back, Walk Like a Man. And this was like the top 4 or 5 that year. And when I started researching this, I realized that at that time in our lives, the songs were only about surfing, love, and coffee. We aren't at the war yet. We're not at Vietnam. We're not doing that kind of thing yet. So it was just a really pleasant time, I guess, to have music embedded in my brain. And to find out after all that time that that's really what the Sugar Shack was about and that they got married. So I don't know why I didn't play the whole thing out in my head that that's what was going on. But this is just a really good time for music. It really, really was. And I guess the reason why I wanted to come on real quick is there's just so much bull going on right now. And the one way that I have been trying to create a spectacular life and get out of the negativity, and I do get sucked into it, and I say I'm not going to, but I can't help it. It's politics, it's election year, and it happens to me every time there's an election year for the presidential race. Always has been. But the thing is that my escape is music. And I believe that it can literally change the world, save the world, as it did me when I was a little girl in my little environment, my world, my brothers and sisters, my mom and dad, trying to find myself, fit in with myself, and like myself. And so I created this little spectacular world with music. And so I wanted to come on real quick because it's not getting any prettier with this presidential race. And there's the hatred that is growing that is obviously a little bit more contagious than loving and liking someone. So we have this going on in our world and in our universe. And I just want to encourage you guys. I know it sounds corny. I know it sounds strange, whatever. But my escape, I promise, just do this one thing. Find one good song. Find a place where you can dance privately if you don't want to dance with your family, and dance your heart out. Your day will change. hate will leave your body, stress will leave your body, and it will change you. Because there's nothing that I have found more fascinating in the heat of it all. I don't care when it was, what era, what